today's talk, Hammering the Glass Ceiling, a fantastic subject for a fantastic panel, which I'm very, very privileged to host. This early January marks a very special time. 40 years ago, in fact, a little longer, but you will hear about it very soon. Anke Adler-Slottke, who's been a long time part of BFAMI, joined Christie's and was the first female auctioneer at Christie's. She is our panelist today, and we wanted to congratulate her firstly for such an amazing accomplishment and anniversary. So congratulations. Alongside Anke, we have Georgina Hilton, who is the new generation of female auctioneers at Christie's. And I'm not going to go into a very detailed introduction yet. I will shortly. But firstly, I am going to start with our own Anke, as she is part of our family, as we like to call, and so well known to so many of you who come to all our BFAMI events. First of all, it goes without saying that how we wish we could be doing this in person, because it is, we do have great culture events and panels, but to be sitting alongside these two ladies would have been so much nicer in the auspices of King Street, where we are so warmly hosted by Christie's usually. But this is what we can do at the time of the pandemic, and we hope we reach you in your homes in a healthy place, and you are well and are coping with the pandemic as well as you possibly can. At BFAMI, we have tried and we are hoping to bring you content and culture to your homes, to your screens, in the hope that as soon as we can meet again, we will. But that's enough about us. Anke, welcome. And congratulations. I don't think, since I have personally joined BFAMI, which I think was 15 years ago, I have never been to an event or to a talk or to a culture event that doesn't include you. You have had such a stellar career, not just at Christie's, but before, which we'll discuss shortly, and really have redefined the role of the women in the art world and made it, as Georgina and I will discuss later, really paved the way for the next generation. You joined Christie's in 1980, but prior to that, you worked at Robson Lowe, an auction house, and subsequently it merged into Christie's, which is where the 40th anniversary comes from. However, you were working there prior to that. And I'm not going to read your bio because it comes much more exciting, and people are not here to listen to me, they want to listen to you. But if you could maybe just give us a little bit of introduction about your career, your history at Christie's and before, and then we'll come back to me. So without much further ado, I give you Anke, and I congratulate her first, and I let you speak.
Well, Pamela, thank you so much for your very, very kind and warm words, really. Many thanks to you as the co-chair of BFAMI, and of course, Poyu, who is the other co-chair. But BFAMI has been so dear and close to our hearts. And at Christie's as well, I must say, there is a whole generation of people to whom BFAMI, the word BFAMI and the British Friends of the Art Museums of Israel means something. Thank you, to the whole team at BFAMI. You're right, I started in Pall Mall, and it was really just now, quite frankly, thinking about it and going down memory lane a little, you reminded me that James Christie started his first and had his first auction in Pall Mall. So this is, there is Robson Lowe, and my goodness, this goes back a long time, and fashions were different then. But so starting off in Pall Mall in 1963, because Robson Lowe had been asked to sell a very important collection of philately stamps, and that was an amazing hobby, international hobby at the time. And the collection comprised stamps of the European continent, Switzerland, German states, Italian states, and France and Austria. And since I spoke 4 of those languages, I was hired by Robson Lowe to help him market this fabulous collection, but he wanted to sell it in London. And of course, I immediately said, why should we sell it in London? All the countries we are selling are really relating to the continent. So there was this father figure of mine. He was so many years older. I was really quite young still. I always say I was in Platz. Said, well, find out. And we ended up in Basel, at the 3-corner country city, Basel, and with our first auction in 1964. Now, the training, what training did I get? In 1963, he said to me, well, you can count, can't you? Well, yes, I could count, but this was still at the time when Britain had a different currency. It was guineas, and it was jolly difficult, actually, to keep pace with the counting. But the clients in the room were very helpful, and that was my training. The next auction was taking place in Basel and selling the classic stamps of Switzerland. And that in 1964 meant that the auction room was full of Swiss gentlemen in dark suits and no woman inside. I was the only girl, and you could see it a little bit at the reaction on their faces. What is she doing up there? Everybody knew Robson Lowe, but they didn't know me, this girl there. And but this was really the challenge at the time, without training, but just being told by Robson Lowe, you speak the languages of Switzerland, don't you? French and German and Italian, and off I went. And thankfully it went well, because there was a realization early on that people come to an auction in order to buy what they want. There is no force of them. They have seen something they want to acquire. And your role as the auctioneer is to enable them to acquire whatever it is they've come for. So you want to create an atmosphere that is helpful. That includes, of course, looking at clients, making sure that you have, the right client when they sit one behind the other, that you give a kind of indication that the bid rests with a gentleman in a pink tie or whatever it may be. But also what helped in those days in the 60s, when you did not have an instant converter, that I could address people in their language. And we didn't have the euro in those days, so one was selling, people had to think in lire, Italian lire, or in French franc, or in Swiss francs, etc. So when breaking into their language and giving it, repeating where I was in French or German, it gave the other interested party a chance to make a quick calculation, etc. So the auctions actually proved to be very successful, and for many years I therefore took sales in Switzerland. And this was also as the first Anglo-Saxon auction house. It was some years later that we had Christie's had sales in Geneva and Sotheby's, etc. So one was a trailblazer there, and soon not only selling philatelic items or stamps from Europe, one branched out into overseas countries, so the Far East, because Britain had been instrumental in the 19th century to print many of these stamps, whether they were Chinese or Persian or whatever of the British Empire. So this then really, this setup with Robson Lowe went back to a commercial agreement that Robson Lowe Limited had with Christie's that went back to the 1950s. So when in the 1980s, also the collecting attitudes and habits changed, we merged with Christie's, which, always having been interested in the arts, was a wonderful opportunity for me to now really every day go into the auction rooms, the viewing rooms, and have a look at what was being exhibited and what was being previewed. But also, I believe, the experience that I gathered while working with philately, which was an international hobby, immediately allowed me to bring to the art auctions that international experience, and which we then carried on with, and really helped also to open up new markets and new areas in the Far East, in Russia, etc. So that really, thankfully, paid off, because, as I said, it was being thrown into the auction world without any training. And when you speak to Georgina, you will see how tough the training is these days. But it was, of course, a man's world. And also, as I said, in those days, some of the cantons, the Swiss cantons, hadn't even given the vote to their women in the 1960s and the 1970s. And also, just to remember, here in Britain, I believe in the 70s, no woman could take out a loan in order to buy a house. So we have come a long way since those days, I must say. And it was really overcoming the kind of surprise that so many collectors expressed initially when they saw a woman or a girl to start off with, and then a woman, I got married, etc. But overcoming that surprise and making them feel comfortable, that was a challenge. Actually, every time one took a sale, whether it was later on in Italy, or whether it was in Paris, or in Bermuda, or in charity sales in the Ukraine and in Shanghai, etc. So it was a kind of pioneering that really kind of spurred me on from venue to venue, from challenge to challenge.
Just one thing you didn't say, but I think our panel, people watching the panel will be very interested to know, is that you were the first woman at Christie's to hold an evening sale in 1994.
Now, this is so true, because the different venues and the different countries that we explored, and we had an office in Israel, already going back to the 70s, but it was in 1994 that we held the first auction there. And this was certainly a consideration. All the evening sales are the ones that are the most important sales, which Georgie is taking in Hong Kong, etc. That was the domain of our male colleagues. And when it came to holding that first sale of Impressionist and 19th and 20th century art in Tel Aviv, we had with us all those senior male auctioneers. And there was indeed some sort of conversation beforehand whether I should take the sale or not. Now, I was very familiar with Israel, of course, and knew a lot of clients, so that prevailed, and I took the sale. And we were, of course, this is what you do when you are selling in London or in one of our main offices, but certainly in London, you sell in an auction room, you sell from a Chippendale rostrum, or copy of a Chippendale rostrum. But when you sell in other venues, it is a hotel. So we had converted this dining room into an auction room, which then took about 650 people. And it was an event. It really launched the evening sale with a female auctioneer, but also in order to celebrate it, I had bought myself a fuchsia jacket because I felt people had to see you. And hitherto, all our male auctioneers were always wearing their school ties. And they were, to say it honestly, they were rather conservative. So there I was in this fuchsia jacket and broke another taboo that going forward, all our male auctioneers were then encouraged to wear rather more colorful ties so that people could spot you. And one other little anecdote from that sale, if I may, because we had so many clients in the room and it was getting hotter and hotter, and you work from an auctioneer's book. And there is a certain lot when I felt the perspiration running down my face and landing on the auctioneer's book. So that is eternalized there from the sale in Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Thank you, Anke. I think we could all listen to your stories for a long time, but I'm just going to use this little pause as a segue into an introduction. As many of you know, BFAMI is privileged to have an incredible group as our committee and trustees. And we, in this conversation, I would like to mention the role of two incredible women, Melanie Clow and Helena Newman, both who have built their incredible careers at Sotheby's. And the role of what they've done as women auctioneers, along with Anke, I think has led the way to this new generation of auctioneers, where I think now, thankfully, hopefully, people are not blinking when they go to a beautiful sales room at any of the auction houses, and the evening sale with the most expensive works is being taken by a woman, which is very different from the scenario you were depicting 40 years ago, Anke. And on that note, I'd like to introduce our viewers to Georgina Hilton, who some of you may or may not know. I've had the privilege to get to know her recently. Georgina works at Christie's. She's currently based in Hong Kong. And I guess luckily for us, but not for her, she is stuck in the UK because of new travel restrictions have stopped her from going back to Hong Kong. She's running the marketing events and partnerships for Christie's across Asia out of Hong Kong. And is best known there for her role as Christie's auctioneer, where she has been taking for the last few years some of the most prominent sales, including flagship evening sales. Very early in your career, Georgina, you were awarded the Novice Auctioneer of the Year award by the National Association for Valuers and Auctioneers. And you were also honored as Christie's Rising Star of the Rostrum, which is, quite a nice headline. And someone wrote here that your theatrical style and contagious energy sets you apart. And it is really a pleasure to have you among our BFAMI friends today and to introduce you. And everybody will be very much looking forward to hearing a bit more from you. So welcome, Georgina.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for inviting me because, as you mentioned, I'm currently stuck in the UK, waiting to be on board a flight to go back to Hong Kong, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. And with no auctions going on, it's been a pleasure to be able to talk about auctioneering and to catch up with Anke over the last few days as we've prepared for this. I could listen to Anke's stories all day. Anke really is the original trailblazer of auctioneering, and I'm very lucky that I now exist in a world where the gender of the auctioneer is completely irrelevant. And it's just about being a brilliant auctioneer, and you're no longer a brilliant female auctioneer necessarily. So thank you for having me. Shall I tell you a little bit about when I first became an auctioneer?
Yes.
So I had my first auction at Christie's was almost exactly 4 years ago. And that was at Christie's South Kensington before it closed, which was actually a great place to have learned and to take my first sale, because there was something a little bit more informal about Christie's South Ken. And I'd been at the company for a couple of years, but as Anke mentioned, the training and the trials to become a Christie's auctioneer is now, well, it's much more vigilant than it sounds like it was back in the day. We certainly weren't just thrown into the rostrum. I started at Christie's the day after I left university. And within probably my first week of being at the company, I happened to ask someone how one became a Christie's auctioneer. And I was told that every 2 years there was an X Factor style competition whereby anyone who was interested could go and try out. And I thought, well, to me, it looks like quite a fun role. I'd be up for that. So I signed myself up to try out at this competition, only to realize on the day that there was no training or no preparatory work. You were presented with an auctioneer's book, and then you were to have a couple of hours to prepare yourself before you sold 5 lots to a panel of judges, all of whom were senior executives at Christie's in London. So as you can imagine, my quite limited experience of Christie's, you know, of working life, of auctions, I did probably get 4 quite firm no's at that stage. But it was at that moment that I met Hugh Edmeades and the various people who were involved in training, and now as Nick Finch. And they did take me under their wing, and they invited me to lots of charity auctions, and they gave me moments to practice outside of the Christie sale room. So 2 years later, I tried again, having done lots of practice, and I was very lucky to then be taken forward into the training, which was then several months of practicing before I took my first sale at Christie's in South Ken. And then, as you mentioned, I mean, who even knew that an award existed, which is Novice Auctioneer of the Year? I certainly didn't, but I think it was actually my father who spotted an advert for this competition in the Antiques Trade Gazette, calling all young auctioneers. And I think the criteria was that you had to have taken 4 or fewer auctions in your time. And it was calling auctioneers from the property industry as well as fine art. So I thought I'd certainly fit that bill, and I had only taken 1 sale at the time. I may as well apply. And there was 9 of us who were put forward to the competition, which was a 2-day competition in a hotel in Oxford. And of the 9 nominated individuals, I was the only woman, which actually even 4 years ago is surprising, because there are many more female auctioneers, particularly today. But I was the only woman in that competition, and completely by surprise, because I was just looking to survive and not embarrass myself, I did win. And so that was in only after having taken 1 sale at Christie's. And that was a great moment, because I think it got me a bit of recognition. And then I was put forward to take more and more sales in London. And then 2 years ago was moved to Hong Kong, which has been a entirely different auctioneering experience for me, getting used to selling in Hong Kong dollars for a start, but also the nature of sales there does seem to be quite different, getting used to the different ways of bidding and the cultural differences. And also I've been very lucky to travel around Asia and take many charity sales in places like Tokyo and Thailand. Anke mentioned when she was taking a charity sale with having a translator. And actually the first auction that I took, having moved to Asia, was a sale in Tokyo, a charity auction, but it was an art auction. So there was quite a sort of formal auction setup rather than the usual gala dinner. And when I arrived and got to know everyone, I was still quite nervous, having just arrived in Asia. I realized that every single person in the room and who I'd spoken to only spoke Japanese. So how on earth were they going to be able to understand me as an auctioneer? And then I was introduced to my translator, who would be translating me on the evening. But for me, the art of the auction is the rhythm and being able to think on your feet and respond immediately to bidders. And the idea of having a translator keeping up with me felt like it was going to be enormously challenging. But actually it was fine. And I think the audience were able to sort of respond to my body language and know where the bid was and what was coming next without necessarily having to listen to the translator. So we survived. But being in Asia has been a really exciting challenge for my auctioneering, and particularly over the last year when auctions have changed. They're almost unrecognizable now. I've just been watching the Sotheby's Old Master sale, which is going on as we speak. And it's now very difficult to work out where the auction is. They're such global events. The auctioneer is literally on a global stage with bidders from all of the different regions that the auction house is in. And yeah, it's an entirely tech-driven experience these days.
Fascinating. Thank you, Georgina. It's amazing, Anke, how things change. You know, when you're discussing your auctions that you took and the currencies and the lack of technology. And then you fast forward or slow forward to today, when you see this, these global internet online auctions that, because of COVID, needs must, the auction houses have put together. It's quite remarkable. In your experience, how have you seen the change of the role of the auctioneer in the last 40 years plus to where we are now? You have such an incredible vantage point to have seen it, not only because on the commercial side from Christie's, you worked in so many important auctions, but also you were one of the first auctioneers at Christie's who really developed, along with other people in Sotheby's, the charity auction role. I mean, I can't, outside of BFAMI, you have volunteered to so many different charities where you were taking the lead auction for these charities. And I think something that was quite rare maybe 20, 25 years ago, with which an art auction for charity, now there are so many charities holding these auctions. So where do you see the last 40 years, how the role of the auctioneer and the incorporation of the charity auction has brought in? Anke, if you give us a little bit of your insight.
One of the biggest and most important benefit auction, charity auction, was the first restitution.
I'm sorry, I think I'm having a little bit of trouble, so let's give it a second and hope that her connection is going to come in. I think one of the most important auctions that Anke is now going to discuss is what led to the restitution auction. So let's hope that her connection. Anke, do you want to try again? We lost you for a few seconds.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
You can. Well, the biggest benefit auction that led on to many other benefit auction, charity auctions, the auction houses are in a unique position to help charities because of their international clientele and their savoir-faire, their know-how. But the biggest charity benefit auction rarely, which then launched restitution as such, was the Mauerbach benefit sale that we held, that Christie's held, and I was charged to organize and then help sell, was in 1996 in Vienna. And this was devoted to more than 10,000 items that had been confiscated, stolen by the Nazis from, in the main, Jewish families. And this kind of cache of mainly paintings, flat arts, but also furniture and various artifacts was known about and was kept in a place called Mauerbach, and so it became known as the Mauerbach auction. And as I said, there was an act of parliament in 1995 where the Austrian parliament passed this law that they were handing over what to them was now heirless property. They had tried to find heirs still of the victims of the Holocaust, and they've decided this was it. And they handed these 10,000 items to the Jewish community in Vienna, which is a very small community after the war. So what could they do? So they approached us, and I was then tasked to organize and help with the sale of these items. Now, as you know, you're all familiar with the art world, and provenance is, of course, one of the most important things. And here we had heirless property. Without provenance, you didn't know anymore the family, etc., where they had originally come from. So the challenge was tremendous, and I lived it for virtually a year in deciding we would print 30,000 catalogs, more than 30,000 catalogs. That is a huge amount of catalogs. Normally you only print 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, because these days you are very targeted. But one wanted to be able to send these catalogs all over the world in the hope that survivors or heirs would still recognize some of the items. And during the course of the preparation of the sale, it also became known that in fact there were complete lists that Jewish families had to compile before they either could still leave Austria or were sent to one of the concentration camps. So the catalog did certainly help to find still some families who thought to recognize items, and one was able, with the help of these catalogs, to restore and have the items reunited with family members. But it also, to stress, it really put this kind of auction on the map, because the sale took place in 1996, and it was the catalyst for the conference in Washington in 1998, where Western countries, in the main Russia didn't participate, but Western countries were helped to look into their museums and collections, famous collections, with a view to restitution. And since we had press calls in New York, we had press calls in London and in Vienna, and that was the beginning of the international interest taken. And you may remember, and in London and in England and probably some other countries, we have just marked the Holocaust Day. Because so many people had given up hope that they would ever be able to even be recognized as having suffered during the Holocaust, but also having items restituted. This sale, as I said, was the catalyst for the restitution that is ongoing. The content of the sale was from Austrian families. So the proceeds of the sale were high. In those days, it was in excess of 14 million, nearly $15 million, which was a lot of money in those days, because a lot of the items were from bourgeois families. They were not tremendous works of art, but because of the publicity in a way generated, the participation of people from the world over was tremendous. And that is what you had to rise to as an auctioneer as well. While we initially had decided on 5 sessions, we were selling until well past midnight, and we had to have a rota of auctioneers in order to cope. But one anecdote there, which the evening before I was just locking up, we were hosted by the Museum of Applied Art in Vienna, generously having put the museum at our disposal. I received a phone call from somebody in Canada and said, well, tomorrow's auction, and I have recognized 2 paintings. This was the evening before the sale. And I said, oh, sir, you have to get hold of the Jewish community quickly, because the sale is taking place tomorrow morning at 10:30. And so that they can identify, your claim, etc., etc. And he said, no, I don't want to claim these 2 pictures. I will phone them, I will identify them and identify the address of my parents in Vienna. But if you could, I would really love you to sell them, when you come to selling them, in the memory of my parents who perished in Auschwitz. And that's what I did the next morning. It set a pattern, this restitution sale. Many famous sales followed of individual items. This was a large sale in terms of quantity, but you will all be familiar with many famous paintings that have since been restituted. And all the auction houses, if you also think about it, up to that sale, when you were selling, particularly in the old master sales, the provenance was given, the exhibitions were given, but then there was very often a gap in the 30s. And nobody gave it any further attention. That has changed totally. Every auction house, every dealer will now, when you are coming across a work of art that has that gap, will now be able to check on it. The companies have special departments, as Christie does, and there is the art loss register. There are various ways now of establishing that. That all, well, it was that Mauerbach sale that was, as I said, the catalyst for all of that. Memorable.
Incredibly memorable, and how poignant that we discuss it today when we are commemorating the International Holocaust Day and Remembrance, and such an important role that you had in marking this history. Georgina, I think Anke brought one of the questions in our panel is what's one of the most exciting sales you've been involved. I think on a historical point, Anke has obviously touched upon restitution, excuse me. What is the most exciting sale you have been involved in, if there is one, in your fleeting but very short career, but incredible career?
Gosh, it's a difficult question, because every time I step off the rostrum, I feel like I've had a better sale, really. I mean, you're constantly learning as an auctioneer, and you're constantly having new experiences, so it only gets more exciting. I do feel the most recent set of sales that we had in Hong Kong were particularly exciting for so many reasons. Firstly, up until the very last minute, we didn't know whether we were going to be able to go ahead with these auctions because of the situation with the pandemic. You know, it's an ever-changing environment out there, and we really rely upon having a public audience to an extent in our auction rooms in order to have that atmosphere that you really want to have as an auctioneer. And we were able to go ahead. We were very lucky with the timing at the end of November in Hong Kong. But there are 5 auctioneers based in Hong Kong, and we usually rely upon the support of our Christie's colleagues who are auctioneers flying in and supporting, because we had 17 auctions in 5 days. So without the support of our colleagues, you can imagine it was an extremely busy week. But it's so exciting, and you're going from selling handbags in the morning to vintage watches in the afternoon. Then you're on the rostrum selling Chinese works of art the next day. And you obviously can't become a specialist in everything that you sell, but you do spend the weeks leading up to the sales talking to all of the specialists and really trying to understand what it is that's valuable about these pieces. So the whole experience of the November sales in Hong Kong was a great moment for us in Hong Kong to come together and do it all as a team on the ground without the support that we're used to. But the modern and contemporary art evening sale was the most important sale I've ever been given the privilege to auctioneer. And it might well have been Yussi or one of our other senior auctioneers who would have flown in. So I was very lucky to have that opportunity. And it was also the highest valued sale we'd ever put together in Hong Kong. So the pressure was on. I mean, you might usually sell 40 lots in an evening sale, and this sale had 60. So I was due to be on the rostrum for potentially 3 or 4 hours, but you never quite know how long it's going to take. Anyway, I think I was up there for just over 4 hours, and it was quite a marathon, but an unbelievable sale. And we did break several world records, and we had people bidding in the room, obviously lots of online bidding and lots of telephone bidding. There was one moment sort of probably towards the second half of the sale where you never really think about your energy levels, because you've got so much adrenaline, and you're getting your energy from the excitement of the bidding in the room and engaging with the telephone bidders. But there was one moment with all of the bright lights on me, particularly with this new digital experience that we were creating for our clients watching at home, which meant that there really were sort of hundreds of lights and cameras on you, that I did suddenly think, oh my gosh, it's been 3 hours. And think, oh, am I going to get lightheaded here? And you've obviously got your microphone on, and I turned to my clerk, who's your absolute best friend and lifeline when you're auctioneering, because they're by your side, tracking everything, spotting bids. And I tried to say as quietly as possible, please, could you get me a sugary drink? But with my microphone on, I think even my mum watching at home in England could hear it loud and clear. Anyway, it was a saving grace, and it meant that I could keep going till the end of the sale, which I think was just over 4 hours on the rostrum, and definitely the most exciting sale I've taken at Christie's.
I must say, on the viewer's side, it looked impeccable, and absolutely no one could tell you were lightheaded. But I think a lot of the questions that I'm reading on the Q&A is that the excitement of that sale, as you just attested to, the adrenaline rush, the moment. I mean, the responsibility is massive, and although obviously it is the works that they're selling, you're the pivot, you're that point of attention throughout, whether it's for a charity sale, for old masters, for wine, for gorgeous handbags. Do either of you have a ritual going onto that sale? And taking that question, and I'm going to add to that question a little bit, I said, may you touch as well on that huge preparation that goes on, because I'm very lucky where we sit at BFAMI, we work so closely to the auction houses when we organize our auctions once a year, and we see the amount of work the specialist and the auctioneer go to really deeply know the works you're selling, which I'm amazed when you have 17 sales in 5 days across the different sectors, how you can do that. But usually you tend to be a bit more specialized. So if you're an old masters auctioneer or impressionist and modern art, nowadays, given all the limitations, you're all doing across the board. So if you could discuss, either of you, and maybe Georgina, you can start with this, the preparation and then the rituals ahead, and Anke can follow up.
Yeah, of course. So I already mentioned that I like to spend time with the specialists from each of the departments for the sale that I'm taking to really get to know their collections and the pieces that are coming up. But I think it's very easy to get distracted by this idea of the show and the theatre. And actually, if you really think about your role as an auctioneer, I like to think the show is a byproduct of you doing your job really well. And before I get on the rostrum, I always remind myself that there are 3 parties who are effectively watching me, and those are the 3 parties that matter the most, and that's the vendor of each lot. Imagining that the vendor for each lot is in the auction room watching me. It might be a beloved family heirloom they're parting ways with. They're clearly going to want the best price for this piece and for you to give it as much energy as possible. So you have the vendor watching you, and then you have all of the collectors, the passionate collectors who might have turned up. They might be on the telephone or online. And, you know, these collectors really follow the pieces that they're looking for. And it's up to you as the auctioneer to give them each equal opportunity to bid for that piece at auction. So you have the vendors and then the collectors watching you. And then you have the specialists, your colleagues at Christie's, who have actually done all of the hard work. They've been traveling around the country, bringing in these pieces for sale, late nights in the warehouse, all of the cataloguing, and finally the exhibition setup. And you're acting on their behalf to make all of their hard work worth it at the end of the day and get the right price for these pieces. So if those 3 parties leave the auction smiling, then I feel you've done a really good job as an auctioneer. And I think it's in juggling all of that whilst you're auctioneering that actually creates the beautiful show, and that creates the theatre. So I try to shrink my role down to that, and then everything else is sort of secondary.
That's so
Anke,
wonderful. It's wonderful, Georgina, to just hear that you have been doing this for 4 years, and you mentioned all the points that are so important. It really is, a lot of preparation goes into it, and it takes a big team to come to the point when you get up on the rostrum to take the sale, and the responsibility is there. I mean, just to go back to the restitution sale in Vienna at the time, in the end, we had about 100 people, 100 members of staff of Christie's involved with that sale, whether it was in America, whether it was in Tel Aviv or London and the other sort of European countries. But it is true, it is the culmination of a lot of hard work and preparation when you get up on the rostrum. And then I find it is, one is conscious, you have your reserves, you have your increments, you have your commission bids and the telephone bids. And I remember when I took the first auction, we had the camera for the internet participants right up. And one is normally used to even give a smile and an acknowledgement to a colleague who bids on the telephone, certainly to the client in the room, because you will also identify the client to the right or to the left to make sure that they know that you've got their bid. And I found it always very incongruous to look up at the camera and say thank you, and there was just that dark hole of the camera. But it is this that I find to create, it is a happening, there is a bit of theater involved, you have all the responsibility on your shoulders, but you also want to enable people to acquire what they have come for. And if they are the underbidder and they don't manage to buy this time round, you absolutely ensure that you've given them sufficient time to make all the calculations or still the phone call while the auction is happening to a third party or getting advice. It is the body language that we observe, the signal from the client that they could possibly go one further increment, one further rise. And you know, we do use, of course, phrases which I'm sure many of you know. This is against you, sir or madam. It's a lady's bid and not the gentleman who is the underbidder. And are you sure you've come a long way? One more. It is the one more that we really try to encourage people to be absolutely sure, because I know, and Georgina, you must have also had this on many occasions, that people come up to the rostrum afterwards and say, I'm so sorry I didn't go up further, you know, that they are sorry. So it's to give them that time. That is then, after having done all your preparations, to ensure that there is a good atmosphere and that the auction rolls, and hopefully, you know, you manage to sell a great percentage of the lots, if not all. In a charity sale, you try and sell every lot. The charity sale, of course, is also different in a way where even you as the auctioneer can buy. We can't do that in commercial sales. If one is interested in a given lot, I think it is at least 48 hours beforehand that you have to show your interest in the form of a commission bid. But and then you can't take part in the auction. The auctioneer is never allowed to bid. But in a charity sale, of course, and you like to take charity sales for a charity with which you have an affinity, that you can say, I'm bidding so-and-so. And I love doing that. Over the years, I've acquired a few items that I didn't really cherish. I just got stuck with them. But at least the charity could claim, you know, every lot sold.
That's super interesting. I think we can't, you know, I'm reading the Q&A and there's a little bit of a theme going, which I was going to bring up, but I think it's very interesting and I think people will be curious. And it comes back to that role of the theater and the auctioneer. The role of fashion has really changed. And I think, Anke, when we had a little discussion last week, all three of us discussed how, you know, you felt you had to wear a suit or be very professional and the mics would go on the lapel, and we talked about it. But now I think in nowadays, fashion has allowed a lot more flexibility and freedom. And I think, Georgina, now in your position, where do you see the role of fashion and what you wear as part of the auction? Anyone who follows you on Instagram will see there's just beautiful fashion when you go on your roster. And you are a spokesperson for Christie's, for yourself, for a lot of brands. And I think, where do you see how that has changed from where we were, 30, 20 years ago, even, where women in professional places, we wore very dark suits and pinstripe because we thought, that made us look more professional. And now, a gold sparkly suit is the most exciting thing you can wear in an auction, as you did in Hong Kong recently. So can you tell us a little bit about the role of fashion and how your style has evolved and how your thought process goes into it? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's one of my favorite topics. I'm about to contradict myself because I have just said that the auctioneer mustn't get too preoccupied by the show itself, and actually we have a very specific role. But that said, don't be mistaken, I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to wear as the auctioneer. And actually one of our colleagues in New York, Lydia Fernay, who's a very well-known auctioneer, once described her outfit as like her armor. And I quite like this idea because I do think the way in which you dress makes you feel a certain way. And for me, choosing what I will wear on the rostrum is a great way of me kind of stepping into that role of an auctioneer, particularly for the evening sales. You attract lots of glamorous clients. There's a certain amount of, glamour to the evening. So you want to dress the part. And actually, I think you can wear very tailored things. It doesn't matter what it is, so long as you feel comfortable. And I do enjoy wearing a bit of gold and sparkle, particularly for those evening sales. And actually, it's just sort of happened in a rather enjoyable, organic way that sometimes brands are now quite keen for Christie's auctioneers to wear their clothes. I think this idea of dressing women in professional roles is appealing to them. So we've had quite a lot of fun with that, and it's always an enjoyable part of the process deciding what we're going to wear.
And Anke, did you have a good luck outfit per se that you thought was always your armor going on to an important sale?
To start off with, not. I certainly believed always in color. That I like a colorful jacket or whatever that I wear. But what also came to mind in London in particular, where we have the Chippendale rostrum, and you climb up this rostrum, into that rostrum. And in the earlier days, I don't want to say in the olden days, but there was a stool because on which you could sit. Because if the auction, and Georgina, you just described it, it can go on and on at times. It's very difficult to foretell. So you could sit on the stool. Now, this stool was made for long-legged Englishmen. And there was also a time at Christie's where you did not wear trousers. And so there you are. Nowadays, and during this lockdown period, one is on screen and it doesn't show what you are wearing underneath your jeans or whatever. But that's certainly at times, resulted in tearing quite a lot of dresses and tights, as you can imagine. And that was one of those remnants of the male auctioneer. These stools have been done away with. And of course, in many of the off-site auctions that we conduct, like in Hong Kong, there is, we take over a certain exhibition center, or we are in hotels, and you have custom made desk kind of, but it's the rostrum which really gives you the height that you require, because in addition to the color, and you as the important person that people have to look up to. It is also the height that has to be calculated. You don't want to look down your nose at people, but you are looking, it does give you the best view as to not to miss any of the bids.
Yes, absolutely. I think that rostrum is beautiful, that Chippendale rostrum. I think one more concluding question, because I'm conscious of our time and I don't want to keep our viewers longer in front of a screen than absolutely necessary. But I think one looking at the future, and perhaps Georgina, you can take a crack at this. And this is, how do you see the role of the auctioneer in the future? Do you think, and by future, I mean in the next, post-COVID, do you think we'll go back to making auctions exciting than live events? I mean, they're very exciting on online events, but live events where people will want to go and bid in the room? Or will we carry on a hybrid auction where some people will be in the room? I understand this summer when there was a little bit of opening up in the UK, we did those in London. There were a few people in the room, but the majority of people were online. And is this an incredible opportunities for the auction houses to just really go global, because we are not longer stopped by the remits of a location? So you do all masters out of New York in theory, but your lead auctioneer is actually in London on Bond Street. So what are your thoughts on the future?
I mean, I think tech has definitely changed the traditional model of the auction forever, particularly over the last year. I mean, we now sell the greatest majority of lots to bidders who have never seen the piece and are either bidding online or on the telephone. And that's never going to change. I think the way in which our clients want to transact with Christie's is much more through technology and remotely. And we've moved a lot of our sales to completely online, so that there is no auctioneer at all. And it makes a lot of sense for a lot of categories, and people can bid on the go. They don't need to turn up at a certain time. However, for the evening sales, the sales of very well-known collections, the higher value sales, I do think that there will always be a place for a live auctioneer. I don't think that technology could ever quite take over that role entirely. I think apart from anything else, it is a spectacle. Brett Gorvey recently described it as a gladiator sport, and people do enjoy coming on the day and watching the sale. And I think for bidders as well, if you come to the auction room, you can get a much clearer sense on who else is bidding, how the sale is going, what the mood is like, whether the other bidder is in the room or the other bidders are on the telephone. It really helps to inform you on how high you would like to go. So I do think that there will always be the role for a live auctioneer for some flagship sales. We'll no doubt continue to see the auction itself be innovated. We've all changed a lot in the last year, and I think we're now finding our feet on what really serves our clients best. The thing with these global auctions, the time zones that we're operating in. So I was on the rostrum at 1 a.m. in Hong Kong in order to be able to be selling to new clients in New York. So we're still trying to work out how to have this global digital sale, but I definitely think that the role of the auctioneer will remain important for as long as we want to have that really exciting moment for the high valued pieces.
I would definitely agree.
I hope so too. And I think I speak on behalf of everybody to say that I hope that we will go back to the auction rooms. And I hope to see more women such as yourselves both on those rostrums, taking incredibly important sales and carrying on the incredible work that has been done by women such as yourself, Anke. You have really, you were the trailblazer, and you created a place for women such as Georgina to shine in. So congratulations on that. I think there's probably loads more to discuss, but I promised everybody a 1-hour webinar, and I tried to stick to my promises. So from me, first and foremost, a thank you and a congratulations again to Anke, not just for today, but for everything you have done for BFAMI And in the art world, you have a lot of fans writing in the Q&A how much they love you and appreciate you. So do we. So thank you. And Georgina, welcome to BFAMI. You know, once you come in with us, you're stuck forever. I'm letting you know that. So we look forward to doing a lot of things with you. Hopefully come and visit you in Hong Kong one day when we can all travel. And I'd like to just take the opportunity to invite you all to, unfortunately on your screens, but on the 24th of February, we're going to have an online gala, and sadly online, but we are working very hard to have a really exciting program. So please stay tuned to the announcements to save the dates, which are coming your way very soon, and to a very exciting initiative that BFAMI is taking on called BFAMI Now. We are going to be putting together a sale of emerging Israeli artists recently graduated in the last 2 to 3 years from the art schools. And it's something we haven't done before. And it's really in the appreciation that it's very, very hard to be an emerging artist in this all of a sudden non-global market where everything is closed and nobody's traveling. So we're going to use our platform to give these artists a way to sell their art. So please stay tuned to all our emails. Don't ignore them. They usually have very good content. And from me, a big thank you to Anke, to Georgina, and to each and every one of you listening on your screens. Looking forward to seeing you all in real life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Bye-bye.
for.
Thank
Thank you very much.